Hello and welcome to my second video. This time I want to talk about something that is much more recent to the current manga events. So big spoiler warning for manga content up to chapter 279 of My Hero Academia. So let's go right into what I want to talk about. This current manga arc, we're now right in the prison break arc. I'm not the only one, I think, when I say that we are very surprised by the fast pace that the story is now taking. It seems we don't even get a prison break arc, but it's just going to be done in a few chapters. The reason I want to make this video is actually, I've been thinking about making a video about Stain for a while now, actually ever since Darby and Hawks fought. I will talk about this later, about the reason why I wanted to make this video. I'm doing it now because I think in this current discussion in the fandom, we're talking a lot about AFO and Shigaraki and what would happen when these two people meet, and rightly so, because that's very interesting and a lot of things can happen here, huge implications for both of these characters. So it's clear that there is a lot of interest in what's going to happen between these two characters. But I also think that in this whole discussion, other characters that are currently in Tartarus are kind of thrown to the wayside and falling under the radar. Two characters in particular I think are probably the most interesting that are currently in Tartarus that we already know. Of course, there are probably a bunch of new characters that will be introduced. We already met this woman last chapter. I don't even know how she's called. She seems to be an interesting character for the future. But as for the characters we already know, I think the most interesting ones are Overhaul and Stain. Overhaul and Stain both because they are not actually former League of Villains members, and they both have met Shigaraki before and didn't quite like him. But I want to focus on Stain. So this video will consist of 3 parts. First I want to talk just very shortly about what has happened with Stain in the manga so far. Then I want to talk about the relationship between Stain and Shigaraki, because that's the most important thing for this video. And then I want to talk about what I think might happen in the future and implications that might have on the overall manga plot. Stain is of course first introduced in chapter 41. His real name is Chizome Akaguro, also known as the hero killer Stain. He's known for killing heroes, as the name says. He has a kill count of, I think at this point, 17 heroes that he killed in Japan, before he was captured finally by Deku, Shoto, and Ida, although of course Endeavor ended up taking credit for the capture. Ingenium tries to capture him, and he, in the preceding fight, cripples Ingenium, leading to Ida wanting to seek revenge against Stain. Later on, he meets Shigaraki for the first time, who is trying to recruit him into his League of Villains. So we get their meeting, what's happened in the chapters 47 until around 50, I think. Then he, of course, goes back to Hosu. He tries to kill the hero native, is stopped by Ida, and then finally captured by Deku and Shoto. Later on, Endeavor has to take credit for his capture. He's put into Tartarus and he remains there ever since. The last time we actually hear of him is when All Might mentioned that he wanted to see Stain. So apparently All Might had a one-on-one meeting with Stain scheduled that had to be postponed because of the events of the war arc. Stain's ideology after he was captured spread far and wide into the country and inspired quite a few villains that we meet later on and that are later on important to the story. Chief among them, of course, the core League of Villain members, Toga, Darby, and Spinner. Spinner, of course, models his entire hero costume after Stain. Toga, at several points in the manga, proclaimed that she loved Stain, that he's one of the people she loves, so she's obsessed with him. And Darby, in the most recent arc, when he fought Hawks, said that he sees himself as, in a sense, the manifestation of Stain's will. I mentioned that I wanted to talk about Stain before, and this was actually when I was first intrigued by Stain, when I first wanted to talk about Stain in detail, and that is because when Darby said that he himself was the manifestation of Stain's will, I thought that something wasn't right there, because what Darby proclaimed to be his conviction, his goal, didn't quite seem to fit what Stain seemed to think. I will get into detail about Stain's ideology later on, but the core difference, of course, being that to Darby there are no true heroes. He very much specifically said that he doesn't think there are true heroes. Stain, of course, we know absolutely admires All Might, so that seems to be something where they have opposed ideas. So I wasn't quite sure if Darby actually does follow Stain's ideology, or if he just thinks he does because they share some things in common, because they both want to change the status quo. So Darby thinks he's following Stain's footsteps, but in fact he's actually not. But there's actually not that much we know about the difference between Darby and Stain personally, because the two don't meet. However, Stain does meet Shigaraki, so we know a lot more about how Stain thinks about Shigaraki's ideas. This is where this whole interesting meeting between these two can happen, because although Shigaraki is seen in many ways as the one to push Stain's agenda into the future, although Stain is kind of in the public scene as a member of the League of Villains, although most of the core members of the League of Villains joined Shigaraki and the League because they thought Stain was part of that league, because they thought this was following Stain's will, Shigaraki and Stain, of course, never worked together. So there's a bit of an untruth here. Darby, Toga, and Spinner, who are still core members of the league and Shigaraki's most trusted, Kurogiri aside, of course, joined Shigaraki based essentially on a lie. I mean, it wasn't a lie that Shigaraki himself spread, but it was a lie that was spread by the public and that Shigaraki very much profited on and just went along with. So let's talk about Shigaraki and Stain and their relationship with each other, to then see maybe if we can say something about the future, because I think it is massively interesting for the future, especially considering that so many of the core league members still admire Stain to this day and still see themselves in a way as Stain's successors. So most of my comparison between these two will come from their first meeting during the Hero Killer arc, when Shigaraki invited Stain to join the League of Villains, and Stain ultimately just declined, of course. In this conversation, they talk a little bit about convictions, about what their respective goals are, and later on, of course, we find out a little bit more about Stain's goals in the battle against Deku, in what he says to Deku and Shoto and Ida, of course, and in later on, like the public news coverage of the whole incident. So the first thing that Stain notices when he meets Shigaraki is that he was fairly disappointed because he didn't think Shigaraki has any conviction. Later on during the arc, he later on admits that there is some conviction there, but the first thing that happens is he's annoyed with Shigaraki because he thinks he has no conviction, he's just in for petty mischief, he's just trying to wreak havoc for no real reason, there's nothing he wants to achieve, he has no real idea in his head, he's just a villain for villain's sake, throwing around his weight without really wanting to achieve something. He then tries to even kill Shigaraki, or rather test Shigaraki, but in the face of death, Shigaraki reacts a little bit different to how Stain expected, revealing that there is some conviction in Shigaraki, and Stain ends up actually admitting that, yeah, there's a seed there that's going to grow, and it's going to grow into something big, and it will be quite interesting to see what's happening there. But at no point does Stain actually acknowledge Shigaraki as a comrade or as somebody who wants to achieve a similar thing. In fact, even after acknowledging that Shigaraki does have some form of conviction that could bloom into real conviction later on, he also says that their goals are very much opposed to each other, that they couldn't be further apart in terms of what they want to reach. The only thing they have in common is that they want to change or abolish the status quo, and that they are willing, of course, to go very far and even kill people to achieve that. But it seems that when Stain saw when Shigaraki told Stain what he wanted to achieve, Stain thought that this boy might have some conviction, and this, whatever conviction he currently has, may bloom into an actually terrifying villain. But his goals are very different from my own. So what are these goals? I think of both Shigaraki and Stain, it's, apart from saying that they want to change Hero Society, it's very unclear as to where they want to change, what they want to change it to. But with Stain, we have a lot more of an idea of what he thinks a true hero is. Stain speaks a lot about the true hero, and he sees All Might as his personification, as the only true hero, the only one who is a real hero. And everybody else is just a fake hero. He later on acknowledges that Deku has potential as a true hero, and he somewhat acknowledges Shoto, although while he does spare Deku and thinks Deku has a future, and he's very interested into what Deku is going to grow into, and he even saves Deku in the end against the Nomu, he seems very willing to kill Shoto. So there's definitely a thing that Stain absolutely thinks there are true heroes. He thinks there's All Might, he does see potential in Deku, he seems to see some potential in Shoto, but he thinks the majority of heroes, most heroes, All Might aside, are just fakes, shams. They are wrong, and therefore they should be killed, because they are not real heroes. They are just parading around as heroes, but in fact they are just selfish. This, of course, is absolutely opposite to what Shigaraki thinks. Shigaraki absolutely hates All Might. At several moments, he states his absolute hate at All Might. He thinks All Might is the problem, while for Stain, All Might seems to be the solution, seems to be the perfect hero, the one everybody should model their hero careers after. To Shigaraki, All Might is the problem. Stain wants an All Might inspired society, and Shigaraki thinks All Might caused society to be as wrong as it currently is. But the differences between these two go beyond just one of them absolutely hating All Might and the other absolutely admiring All Might and seeing him as the one true hero. But they go beyond that in terms of what they actually think a hero should do. At several points in their fight, Stain mentions that Ida is not a true hero because he doesn't want to save Native, because he went in with the intent to kill Stain instead of saving Native. However, Shigaraki at one point in the manga, in the most current arc, said that he hates heroes because they save total strangers instead of people they actually care about. So there's a difference here. I've recently read a very interesting thread on Tumblr by a user called Xiverni. I'm gonna probably link that in the description, where we were talking about the difference between heroes being about collectivism and Shigaraki being about individualism. It seems that Stain follows an idea that a hero should absolutely put the collective good above their own, and above their family, and above fame and wealth and whatever. He thinks all of these heroes are fake because they don't do this. While Shigaraki seems to think all of these heroes, the problem in hero society is that all these heroes do this. And that's where they are very much opposed to each other. The idea of what it needs to be a hero, the idea of what is good about heroism and what there should be more of, is something where they absolutely disagree on. Shigaraki thinks people should be selfish, while Stain thinks heroes should be selfless. There are certain other things where they seem to disagree on. That is, of course, the use of nomus. Stain did express some dislike for nomus. So now that we are a little bit in the future, of course, Shigaraki has evolved a lot. So I think when Stain meets him again now, he will have to acknowledge that Shigaraki definitely has a lot of conviction. But he also will still see that the differences they had in the beginning, they still have. All Might is still somebody that I think Stain admires, and still somebody that we all know Shigaraki absolutely hates. Stain is still about the collectivism of heroism, and that's still the thing that Shigaraki despises about it. Stain still probably rather dislikes the idea of nomus, and Shigaraki uses high-end or near high-end nomus to free the people from Tartarus. There's a certain chance, I assume, that his experiences in Tartarus might have changed Stain, but what we know of Stain, that being him being all about conviction, I think it's unlikely that he would change his opinion because he is held in Tartarus, even a prison like Tartarus, for a few months. I think the most striking thing about Stain is how strong his convictions are, and it would be kind of weird if in prison his convictions would change so completely. So what this comes down to is that clearly these two don't really get along. Yes, Stain did acknowledge later on during the meeting that Shigaraki has convictions, but their convictions, their goals, what they want to achieve, what they believe in, is very much the opposite of each other. Even after he acknowledged that Shigaraki has some conviction, he still at, I think, multiple different points in his short time during the Hosu arc, he said that he will have to deal with Shigaraki at some point. He says that after he realized that Shigaraki has convictions, he realized that this kid is actually dangerous. This kid might actually grow into a real villain, and it's very interesting to look what he's going to grow into. But also, I think he says, I will deal with you later. And then even later on, when he fights Native and he realizes that Shigaraki has come after him to release the Nomu, he also says that he will have to deal with Shigaraki later. But it's not just that Stain doesn't like Shigaraki, it's also very clear during that entire arc that Shigaraki absolutely hates Stain. He, of course, first invites him over so they can talk possible recruitment into the League of Villains, but he's then very much put off when Stain not just declines the offer, but insults him. I think he calls him he says he lacks conviction. He treats him a little bit like a child, right? Like somebody who's just petty. He talks down on Shigaraki, and Shigaraki doesn't like any of that. Later on, Stain even attacks Shigaraki, and Shigaraki is very pissed about that. We see that very clearly in this arc, that the entire arc is very pissed. And when the whole meeting ends, Shigaraki, although at this point Stain has somewhat acknowledged Shigaraki doesn't even want him anymore. Yeah, Kurogiri says that the meeting is somewhat of a success and that the negotiations were successful and that Stain will lend much firepower to the League of Villains. But Shigaraki doesn't seem all that keen on having Stain in his team. Later on, he even wants to destroy Stain. He follows Stain after Stain into Hosu so he could steal his spotlight, so that tomorrow nobody will remember Stain. That's his expressed goal. He's very petty here. He doesn't like Stain, and I think that's something that's very important because Shigaraki is not somebody who will work with people he doesn't like. So what does this mean for the future, for now that they will meet again during the prison break? What will happen? I think the reason this is so interesting is not just because Stain is an interesting character by himself, but also most importantly because of the influence Stain had on other villains, chief among them, core League of Villains members I mentioned before. Stain absolutely inspired Darby, Toga, and Spinner. This is very important because when these three first joined Shigaraki, they did so because the news spread the message that Stain was part of the League or connected to the League, affiliated with the League, and Shigaraki, although he didn't actually want to be connected to Stain and he didn't want Stain to be that famous, absolutely used that connection to pull in all these villains. So Spinner actually joining the League, Toga actually joining the League, Darby actually joining the League is based, in a way, on a lie. And it would be interesting to see what will happen when this lie comes out. Now, I'm not saying that if Shigaraki and Stain don't get along, Darby, Toga, and Spinner will betray Shigaraki. I don't think that. All three of them at this point, I think, have developed a sort of loyalty to Shigaraki that goes way beyond their initial inspiration that they took from Stain. So I do think they will all three stay loyal to Shigaraki. Spinner even sees him, I think, as one of his best friends at this point, as one of his very few allies, one of the very few people where he felt welcome. And beyond just being loyal to Shigaraki, they are all definitely loyal to the League. The only one maybe that is an exception is Darby, maybe because he mentioned that he was in the League for his own goals and didn't so much care about the members. But I don't think that's actually true. I do think that he does feel a sort of connection to the League and the different members of the League. I don't know how loyal he actually is and how much this will hold if this is actually pushed to the limit, this loyalty. But I do think for now he's loyal, and I don't think he's gonna betray Shigaraki and the League just because Stain says so. I also think that, especially with Darby, but also with Toga probably, that their idea of Stain's ideology and Stain's actual ideology, there's a certain juxtaposition here, that being that they all see themselves as successors to Stain, but I don't think they quite follow Stain's ideology themselves. I said this before when I mentioned Darby, and that is that Darby definitely doesn't see All Might as a true hero. He thinks there are no true heroes. There's no such thing as true hero, and hero society has to be destroyed instead of reformed. Stain was very much in for a reformation of hero society. So Darby is basically pushing this this ideology to extreme, and it's interesting to see how willing Stain is to push his own ideology to the extreme. Is he willing to change his opinion from "I want to reform society" to "I want to destroy society," which definitely is a step that he can make without betraying his own conviction. It's just the next step. But in any case, due to the fact that I think Darby himself is not 100% online with Stain's ideology, even though he says so, I think that might be a reason why if it becomes clear that Stain and Shigaraki have separate sides and are on separate sides and want separate things, that Darby would probably follow Shigaraki because he wouldn't quite find himself in Stain. So what would happen? Because I think this is very interesting. I think there are three main scenarios that can happen. The first is, of course, that Stain joins the League. This is a possibility. This is a possibility that I don't think is the most likely one, because it would involve some betrayal of his own convictions by Stain in regards to joining a group of people that absolutely hates and despises All Might, joining a person whose expressed goal is to bring All Might down when Stain admires All Might and actually wanted to push him up. I mentioned that All Might wanted to speak one-on-one with Stain. I don't know what the meaning of this meeting is, but I think it might be a subtle hint that there is still a connection between All Might and Stain in terms of ideology. I do think that Stain still sees All Might as a number one hero, which is probably the reason why All Might wanted to meet with him one-on-one. So I don't think that Stain will actually be willing to join a group that has the express goal to bring All Might down completely, to kill him completely, even now that he's not even a hero anymore. I think there's no point for Shigaraki to do for Stain to do that. Stain had a sort of moral compass, like he has a very clear set of rules as to who he's going to kill and under what circumstances. And he doesn't like, for example, he doesn't like killing children. That's something he made quite clear. He's willing to do it, but he doesn't like it. And I don't think, even if it weren't All Might, I don't think he would quite like just killing a person who has already retired, who can't even fight back anymore, and who is no threat to him anymore. And even more so somebody he admired as much as All Might. So I do think that this is something where Shigaraki and he definitely will not get along. And if Stain joins, it would indicate that there is a change in conviction by Stain that happened while he was in prison, which is believable, taking into account what a extreme prison it is. It's very believable that suffering under these circumstances for months, Stain will kind of radicalize even more than he already has and want to bring down hero society completely, including All Might. But I don't think it's very believable because Stain is all about that conviction. There's still a possibility that he might join the League just out of self-preservation reasons for a while, or just out of curiosity to watch Shigaraki grow. But if he joins, I don't think he will be very loyal. If he joins, it will be to watch Shigaraki, watch where he's going, but he still has very different goals, and I don't think he's going to change that. Therefore, if he joins, he might later betray them. So the next option is, of course, that they go separate ways. And if they go separate ways, meaning Shigaraki, of course, stays with the League, and Stain just does his solo business again, there's a few interesting scenarios, because although I stated before that Stain has inspired Spinner, Darby, and Toga, but that they are now loyal to Shigaraki, I don't know how loyal they will stay if Stain actually is out and about, does his own thing, and actually lives his ideology. Like, there might be a certain risk for revolt in the League of Villains. I don't know how bad that could get, but I think there's a certain danger if Stain runs free for Shigaraki. Because although his members, his League members, are at this point loyal to him, they believe themselves to be Stain's successors and to follow into Stain's footsteps. So if they realize that Shigaraki walks an entirely different path, and if it gets out that their first reason to join Shigaraki was based on false information, essentially, there is still a possibility that they might do their own thing, revolt to some degree, or want to change Shigaraki's goals, more leaning towards Stain's ideology, that they might not be willing to follow all his commands, etc., etc. There's a certain danger of that. And I do think that at this point, if that is something Shigaraki thinks about, he might do much better killing Stain. And that's the last possibility that I see. and that is that we've talked a lot about whether Shigaraki has to kill All For One because he has to step into All For One's footsteps. I think much more than killing All For One, he probably has to kill Stain. Because if Stain gets out, and if gets out that their ideologies are nothing alike, they want entirely different things, they've never been together, they've never been allies, this might spell problems for Shigaraki. All of his core members joined him because they believed in that. All of his core members believe in Stain's ideology to some degree. All of his core members are inspired by Stain. But all of that is based on the lie that Shigaraki is close to Stain. But he isn't. And if that comes out, there is a certain danger for revolt. So the best way for Shigaraki to circumvent that is just to kill Stain and make sure this doesn't get out. And I think this is actually a possibility because it just so happens that none of his core League members are currently with them, apparently. Apparently he's just here, alone, with a Funomu. Shigaraki is alone. So if he ever gets a chance to kill Stain without questions asked later on, that would be it. So I think killing Stain would be the smart move for Shigaraki. If he doesn't do this, freeing Stain might be troublesome for Shigaraki in the future, either because Shigaraki will work directly against him because their goals are so much opposed to each other, or because Stain will try to use him, or because ultimately his core League of Villain members will maybe overthink their loyalties if they see how different these two actually are. So thank you so much for watching. This is my second video, so apparently I might do this more often now. Like and subscribe, therefore. I'm looking forward to the next chapter. Maybe we will already get something revealed then, which also means I really have to hurry now, so I get this upload before the next chapter comes out. See ya.